As you make your way through the level, you come across a small yellow orb floating in the air. Its glow lights up the world around you. What would you do? Most likely, you'd walk straight towards it. Everything about the game tells you that you're supposed to pick it up. And when you do, instant gratification. You move faster, jump higher, and the world becomes more colorful. Then, another orb appears, and then another one. Without even realizing it, the game has just shown you the beginning of an addiction. This is Hooked, a game I developed to explore a simple question. Can an addiction be represented through the mechanics of a video game? Addiction is the physical or psychological dependence on a substance, like alcohol, or a behavior, like gambling. But more than the addiction itself, what fascinates me is how it is born. Understanding why addiction develops is not simple. There are biological, physiological, and social factors involved. In the first place, we got biology. In second place, Argentina.
Knocks it down, it's free! It's a goal!
Let's start with biology. Psychoactive substances are chemicals that alter our subjective experience. In other words, they change the way we perceive the world, our emotions, and even our sense of time. As they do, they activate the brain reward system and trigger the release of dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter involved in motivation and learning. Addiction doesn't happen overnight. Your brain learns that a certain action produces a rewarding outcome, so it starts seeking that action again. Over time, it develops tolerance, meaning it needs a higher dose to produce the same effect. It's just simply to avoid feeling bad. That cycle fascinated me the most, because I realized addiction is not a matter of willpower, it's a process. And that process was exactly what I wanted to turn into a game mechanic. For a long time, I thought dopamine was simply the brain pleasure chemical. But its role is much more interesting than that. It's also deeply involved in learning. It teaches your brain what actions are worth repeating. And if video games are constantly teaching the players what actions are worth repeating through rewards, could that same principle be used to represent the birth of an addiction? Then I learned something interesting. There is people who like to get high on industrial glue. Like, how the fuck do you get high on industrial glue? If you grew up in the late 90s or the early 2000s, chances are you've watched SpongeBob. I certainly did. And strangely enough, one of the episodes that I remember the most was Hooky. But years later, it started to make a lot more sense. The episode opens with Mr. Krabs warning SpongeBob about the dangers of hooks, telling him that if he's not careful, he could end up hooked, which is a word that is commonly used to describe someone who's become addicted. Patrick, being the great friend he is, invites SpongeBob to go to the fair instead of working.
It's not leaving, you're just taking a break.
And what a surprise! Patrick takes him straight to the hooks. At first, SpongeBob listens. He knows he shouldn't go near them. But then Patrick says one of my favorite lines of the show.
Look, SpongeBob, are you gonna listen to a big dummy, or are you gonna listen to me?
What's interesting is that the episode never represents hooks as something inherently bad from the perspective of the protagonist. In fact, they look incredibly fun. The characters laugh, play around, and launch themselves high into the air. They use the hooks to lift themselves up and get high. An obvious reference to substance use. And I think that's what makes this episode so clever. We often imagine addiction as something dark from the very beginning, but it rarely starts that way. It starts with something that feels good, something that seems completely harmless. That episode understood something that I had yet to put in words. Addiction doesn't begin when someone loses control. It begins when they discover a reward that they want to repeat. To me, the hooks were the perfect metaphor for how addictive substances are first presented. And that idea was what made me start thinking about video games. Because if you think about it, video games are constantly teaching players what actions are worth repeating. And that's where I began developing. I wanted to create a platformer where power-ups were represented by a small yellow orb, But I didn't want it to behave like any generic power-up. I wanted the player to experience, even if only for a few minutes, how a dependence is built. As I designed the level, I realized it wasn't just good enough to play such a powerful orb in the world. The player needed to make a choice. So I designed almost every obstacle to be completed in one of two ways. The first was the traditional approach: overcome the challenge using nothing but your own skill. The second was much easier: consume the yellow orb and skip the entire fucking level. Each orb makes you faster, lets you jump higher, and fills the world around you with more vibrant colors. Everything feels better, more alive. But when the effect wears off, something happens that the player doesn't immediately notice. Your base movement for speed drops a little bit. Your jumps don't reach quite as high. The colors lose a bit of their vibrancy. It's not a dramatic change. It's actually so gradual that the players start believing that the game has become harder. And that's when the perfect solution appears. Another yellow orb. Consume again. That's the moment I realized this small mechanic had changed the entire meaning of the game. The orb no longer felt like a reward. It started to feel like a shortcut. And I think that's precisely one of the most dangerous aspects of many addictions. They don't present themselves as a problem. They present themselves as the easiest solution to one. My goal was never to make a game where drugs were the enemy. I wanted to make a game where the player gradually realizes that the very thing that seemed to be helping was actually making them weaker. Because I think that's how many addictions work. They rarely arrive disguised as a strategy. They arrive disguised as a reward, as a shortcut, as something that seems to be improving your life. Until one day you realize you can't remember what life felt like without it.